our GRC Summit. It is such a pleasure to see this amazing full day of virtual content and interactions with all of you. In spirit of the MetricStream GRC Summit tradition, I feel very proud as the founder and chairman to keep the spirit of our GRC Summit going, despite the global pandemic, which has affected us all globally. So thank you so much for keeping the spirit alive during these difficult times. So day one has been quite interesting, as I see it. A lot of good conversations, great focus from Bruce Dahlgren, our new CEO, touching on the topics of execution, not just within the four walls of MetricStream, but for the industry at large. I also saw some great content come out from Gaurav Kapoor, our Chief Operating Officer, on our focus on customer engagement and execution, and over 2,500 attendees from around the world, 20 plus speakers, and over 25,000 social media hits. So amazing, velocity and content all across. So with that backdrop, I want to tell you that, I have the honor today to have co-host with me on this conversation, somebody very special, a special guest, Mr. Juan Guitart, Chief Audit Executive of Banco Santander. Juan, hi, how are you doing?
Hello, Gunjan. Very well, thank you. And thank you for giving the opportunity of being here with you all. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Juan. And just as a little introduction to Juan, Juan serves as a Senior Vice President, Executive Vice President, and Head of Internal Audit of Santander Group in Madrid. And he's been with Santander since 1999 and also has served as its Head of the Corporate Risk Division, Head of the Recovery and Resolution Plans Corporate Project, Head of Corporate Legal Department, and Head of the Corporate Finance Unit. Earlier, he served in the Spanish administration's Central Legal Department and as the Deputy Director of the Spanish Treasury Department as well. So lots of amazing experiences. He's also the member of the Santander Holding USA Inc., Santander Bank US, and Santander International Miami boards. So a lot of perspectives which are going to be great for us to kind of bring out. So with that background, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share some slides first, Juan, if that's okay with you, and use that to set some context for the first 7-8 minutes. And then I'm going to have you come kind of share your thoughts on the state of the world and the future of GRC. And then we'll go into some questions and answers, and then we'll open up the line for some Q&A from the audience as well. Is that all right, Juan?
Perfect. Go ahead, please.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to provide some context first on kind of the state of the world as we see it now, right? You look at the world in which we live today. So first and foremost, we are now living in a world which is, hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, that's kind of the headline for 2020. That's where it's one of the historic events of this year, where there's so much change has happened because of the pandemic. New risks have emerged that people were not aware of at the beginning of the year. So this has been the headline story for all of us this year, and that's been an amazing change since last time, when we would have met in London in the last GRC Summit a year back. So that's a key headline. The second point I would feel is that the world has actually accelerated in the digital era much faster. The last 6 months feels like we made 5-10 years of progress on the digitization of the world, led by the pandemic, because the pandemic itself, precipitated how people have to think about the digital world. So for example, the IT cyber risks are further amplified as the world accelerates to a more digital future. We all hear data is the new oil, and we need to make sure that we are protecting the integrity of data, that there are tight controls around data security and data privacy, ensuring that the cloud of the future is built with strong risks and security intelligence around it. Concepts like data governance, data philanthropy, data policies are going to set the stage to create enterprises of the future. And all of that has accelerated precipitously this year because of COVID-19 and the digitization that's taking globally. The third trend that I'm seeing this year is the ESG is intersecting heavily with GRC. ESG and impact investing is becoming a key theme for shareholders of the future, especially younger, more purpose driven shareholders who demand that corporations have to attend to the impending social, climate, and environmental risks. That's the need of the hour. GRC systems have to understand that ESG imperatives and build programs and controls and risk management methods so that systems drive the ESG programs, not just a concept driven by the board or the shareholders. That's going to be critical here. And last but not least, the fourth trend that I'm seeing is what I call the risks emerging from the geopolitical kind of challenges around the world. We are seeing continued trade wars, tariffs. You pick up the newspaper any day or you read online, rise of nationalism, and so much stronger focus and debate on US-China relations or global China relations to help rebalance some of the trade imbalances. These issues are going to be integral and significant going forward. And I mention these to highlight the point that as GRC professionals, we have to understand that the geopolitical risks have to be modeled. We have to understand how it affects our supply chains and third-party relationships with vendors around the world. And how do we put controls? How do we agree on the right risk appetite that we can take around the world to manage and mitigate the geopolitical risks that are around us at this point of time? So with that backdrop, I want to highlight the aspect that the pandemic has really highlighted the whole digital transformation for us. I wanted to talk about the concept of AI for GRC and GRC for AI, which are the two concepts that MetricStream has been advocating and discussing on how we bring technology to help us in this digital world. So that's a key theme for us to understand. The second point I want to highlight here for our whole agenda is how ESG is being brought together by the boards and how we at MetricStream are focused on bringing the software and technology to bring it all together from a controls perspective. And finally, as I said, the geopolitical challenges are key for us to take charge of, especially as you think about third-party risks across the globe. So with that backdrop, the key point to understand is the GRC Cloud of the future has to provide the critical layer securing our infrastructure, our analytics, and our business. If you look at this slide, you'll see the myriads of systems that we have all invested in globally, right? We have spent billions of dollars in technology, in big data, and the landscape. And these are all the software systems that are running global enterprises today. But we do need a GRC cloud on top of that that can actually critically secure this infrastructure, drive the analytics and business in the right format. And that's the reality in which we live today. And one of the key themes which I bring out is if you look at our M7 platform, and I'm sure you're going to hear a lot through the GRC Summit, the world trends today, the four trends that I talked about around digitization, the pandemic, the ESG, and the geopolitical risks, they're all demanding the GRC cloud of the future, built with a proper GRC platform, number one. Number two, complementary GRC enablers. Number three, integrated products and applications. And finally, the enterprise-wide risk intelligence. And how do you do that at scale? That is the GRC cloud of the future in my mind. So it's important to understand that the world events of today, what we are experiencing is actually leading us to think about and rethink about what kind of infrastructure, what kind of GRC cloud of the future do we need to build. And I think with our technology and with your participation and help and all the journeys that I'm seeing on GRC, we have a great story ahead. We have a great approach ahead as an industry to take this forward. So that's the key headline here as I see where we stand today. This is a time in our lives to be resilient. As I said, the pandemic is all around us. At MetricStream, we have launched the Resilience Spotlight. And with that resilience story, there isn't a better story of resilience than what, Juan would bring to the table here in his conversations from Banco Santander. I want to use the time to now let him kind of speak to the views on the state of the world, also share his view of the GRC cloud of the future, and how Banco Santander is actually exhibiting resilience in these difficult and challenging times and the times ahead. So Juan, with that, let me turn it over to you for your comments.
Thank you very much again, Gunjan. And before going to the topics you have identified, let me make, let's say, a formal statement that I have to make. I am here, I am part of Banco Santander, but I am giving my own opinions, not the opinions of Banco Santander here. Okay. Having said that, the first topic you identify is the digital transformation, which clearly has accelerated since March, and that, in my view, can be described in three axes. One axis is that, for sure, the digital transformation will allow all of us, the humankind as a whole, to achieve very positive results that were impossible without it. So I guess that it can be described as the biggest change in the history. The second axis is that being a change and being so big a change, it will create disruption and a tsunami of disruption. The way different countries, different human groups, different sectors, different companies can surf that wave will imply that the change is smoother or is much or more destructive. And if it is too destructive, it may create conflicts. So we have to take care of them. And the third axis, in my view, is that given to a set of factors, including that the digital change is so huge and so rapid that it creates a concentration of power in terms of data, of technology, of wealth in a few hands, and having also into consideration that it happens in a space which is the noosphere, that is beyond the borders in which traditional governance institutions, and mainly the states, have the power. It generates for all of us a big challenge in terms of creating a new governance framework. Well, the second item you mentioned is the post-pandemic situation. And when we talk about the post-pandemic situation, first things we need to identify is which mean post-pandemic and when will it come. In my view, taking into account the number of people that is being infected but survive, the very encouraging news about the vaccines we are receiving, and the so-called cross-immunity, even with other diseases as flu, that the historical analysis of the pandemics give us, we are not over-optimistic if we think that by next year, and probably by mid of next year, we may be in a situation that can be described as post-pandemic. And in that post-pandemic situation, and from a pure economic analysis point of view, in a short, medium term, I guess that for sure we benefit for the fact that the economic institutions, the central banks, the states have reacted in a much better way to this crisis than to the one we have in 2008, 2012. And second, the financial systems are in a much better situation to execute its economic and social role, which is finance the economy. So having said that, we would be in a good situation to react, but at the same time, clearly, everybody will have huge public debt and huge fiscal deficits. So having all that in the puzzle, I think that finally we will end with a time of limited but persistent inflation during some years. The third topic you mentioned is, let's say, geopolitics. And I think that as far as geopolitics, there are two main elements. One is how China gets its position as one of the leaders of the world in a responsible way. And the other one is how the United States comes back to build its international relationships after the Trump era. And both of them will interact clearly. Probably a third element would be how and when and if the European Union can have a more relevant role in the international community as a whole. And finally, you have also mentioned the topic of the GRC and the ESG agenda. As far as the ESG agenda, I think that the most relevant item from our point of view as professionals of GRC is that the G has to catch up with the E and the S that so far have had a more relevant role. The G has to catch up, among other things, because as I have mentioned before, the digital transformation requires a new frame for controls and governance. And only if the G part of the equation catch up with the other, we will be able to cope with that. And that would be very briefly and touching in the topics you identify my very general statements for the beginning of this conversation.
Thank you, Juan, for your comments on all of these four key themes that we discussed around the digital transformation, the post-pandemic kind of realities, the geopolitical challenges, as well as the ESG. And as you look at kind of Banco Santander and what you are seeing from your vantage point, how do you envision the GRC cloud? And the cloud in itself has a lot of elements of data, application, systems, people, and how when you see new technologies like fintechs and other things emerging, where does GRC cloud sit in your worldview as you look at it from your perspective at Banco Santander or for financial services, large banks in general?
Well, I think that GRC, everything that has to do with control, with risk, with governance, has a main challenge that is it has to get its better relevant position under the sun. What I mean by this is that somehow in the past those activities were ancillary, accessory, even relevant to a main activity, being a business or whatever. Now I think GRC activities are essential by themselves. And that's the main concept that has to be toned from the top in the organizations. And that applies to institutions like banks, it applies to fintechs, it applies to everybody. And we are seeing that in our presence in different countries clearly. On top of that, and this is a view from an institution like Santander, it is very relevant that when you do the same activity, you have the same regulations and requirements. So level playing field. It is not acceptable that in the same place, people are playing football, European football, and others are playing rugby, European rugby, and the rules are different, and the referee looks to the different players in a different way. Same activity, same regulation, and GRC being essential by itself from the top.
Yeah, no, I like your concept of, this has moved from being an accessory to becoming a real essential. That's exactly what I'm seeing as well from, my conversations with executives such as yourself globally. And so if you look at the, two or three key opportunities, what are some of the themes that, you can advise organizations to lay the groundwork for them as they are thinking about their foundation for risk management or governance or compliance? Any advice from your side that that you think might be relevant?
Well, I think that the most relevant of all of them is that on top of GRC being essential, not accessory, there is another element that is, as it is essential, it has to be in the table from the very beginning in any project. So, of course, when we are talking about new processes, new products, new fintechs or startups, the first thing they do is thinking about the customer and designing products that are good for the customer and the customers are willing to use. But at the same time, they have to think, all of us have to think on the GRC elements, which will bring GRC by design. In the same process where you are designing whatever you want to do and offer to the public, you have to take care of the GRC elements that have to exist. Is the only way to give GRC not only the position, but also the responsibility it has in the new world.
Yeah. No, thank you, Juan, for that perspective. I completely concur with you on that. Another thought that keeps coming to me as I talk to people, there's a lot of focus, given the large mountain of big data that's emerging, right? And then the real-time monitoring and frameworks for more real-time audits, frontline engagement, in GRC. So from your perspective and from the board of directors' point of view, uh, you know, are there some things that you can advise people to think about on how to turn GRC into more real time, more frontline engaging, so that it's not just sitting with the GRC professionals, it's extending out to the global, extended enterprise and more real time. So any key observations as you look at the cloud of the future, the GRC cloud of the future?
Well, talking specifically about that technological element that is the cloud of the future that you have mentioned as a very big set of different elements that have to be working together. Here I come back to the concept that I have already expressed, that is GRC by design. When you are designing any process, you have to have ARC in your mind and design them taking them into account, because the new technology, the artificial intelligence, the clouds give you the opportunity of doing so and building really resilient projects on the basis of GRC. And then the other very big element that is not a technological one, but a conceptual one in my view. Let me use. I am a lawyer, and let me make a statement out of the Roman Latin law, which is ubi emolumentus ibi onus, which can be translated something like, where you have a profit, you have a responsibility, you have a burden. So, and this is very connected with the motto of this meeting, which is a performance with integrity. It's almost the same thing. You can do business, you can do things, you can have projects, but everything that has with your responsibility, with controls, with avoiding unnecessary risks, and to take care of what you are doing has to be an essential part of any project. Ubi emolumentus, ibi onus.
Juan, and I think the whole concept of the duality of profit and purpose, bringing it together to a higher purpose, which allows for companies to not just act to generate shareholder wealth to profit, but also impact society in a positive way, is the way forward. That is the way the world is actually progressing. So that's great comments. And I have one other comments around. You touched upon the political shifts and new regulations, and so is there more focus going to be on regional delegation or centralization? How do you see, given the political shifts and new regulations, how do you think people will think about either delegating things to different countries or so forth, or there's going to be more focus on centralizing it at the corporate? What's the balance of, what I would call delegation, centralization, or federation, moving forward in your worldview?
Well, talking not about the world generally speaking, but about corporations doing business in different countries and how can they organize themselves, I think that the two elements you mentioned exists are the two parts of a new equation and have to be balanced in each case depending on the type of business and the countries you are present in. But of course, delegation has to do with local teams having the capacity of doing things by themselves and giving services to the clients that adapt to local needs, which is very relevant. But at the same time, both in terms of costs, in the one hand, and responsibility in the other, big corporations have to take care of the organization as a whole, which means centralization. And again, big data, artificial intelligence, proper controls from the beginning, design in the initiation of any process are key to have a good balance between delegation and central controls and central knowledge of what's happening anywhere, and as a consequence of that, central responsibility of your activities.
Yeah, no, thank you. So that's great concept, and I think the world is going to find the right balance of delegation and centralization that allows for the right appropriate controls. And I love the concept of, if I think through what you just touched upon, GRC by design. I mean, that's a great concept because you've got to weave that into the core of the company. You have to build companies which are built on the principles of the duality of profit and mission and purpose, not just one or the other. We have to see how ESG gets embodied into the company, not just a shareholder statement or something that we make representation at the board level. And when we think about the geopolitical risks, the digitization that's happening right now in the post-pandemic era, all of these technologies are coming together, in the right way. So the timing couldn't be better. And Juan, your perspectives are extremely critical here, as we just discussed. These are important elements and phases that not just in Europe but worldwide, customers are experiencing, and they're reimagining their infrastructure for the GRC cloud of the future. And to us, this is a journey that we're making together, and not just our posture has to be to learn from this new reality, but to adapt. And I definitely feel like, it's not the strongest who survives, it's the one who's the most adaptable who survives. And that is the future, that if you want to survive and thrive in this new world order, in this new state of the world, you have to take GRC by design and apply the principles that Juan touched upon. So before we open up the questions for the audience, Juan, any concluding thoughts? And then I'd like to just see if people had some questions for us. Any concluding thoughts from your side?
Well, the only other thing that I wanted to add is that the new technologies, the uses of data that allows for responsible control, I guess that in the future will be also a demand by customers themselves, not only in terms of, for example, environmental, but also in terms of personal data. Clients and customers more and more will ask not only for marketing campaigns saying, I am green, I am not green, this is a green bond or whatever, or I use the data in a responsible way. They will ask for elements of check and control that can really certify that what you say is happening in your day-to-day behaviors. And that can only be done with a very relevant base in big data GRC systems with tone from the top by the box. No?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I could not agree with you more. As I touched upon, I do believe data is the new oil. It is what drives the global economy as we go look ahead into the future. And we need tight controls around data security and data privacy. I touched upon some concepts earlier, and as you touched upon it, the data governance becomes very important in this future of the cloud. I also, touched upon this concept of data philanthropy. Companies will give data out as part of the philanthropic stuff, what I call data for good, that can allow to solve societal problems. And that's one way to kind of bring profit and purpose together, because data shouldn't just be used just for your own good. Data can also be used for the societal good. So data philanthropy is going to be a concept into the future, and strong data policies and controls are going to set the stage to create, in my mind, the clouds of the future, the enterprises of the future, which will hold themselves to much higher standards of due care. With that backdrop, let me turn over and see if there are some questions that we can take. Are there any questions from the audience, please? So the first question is, the pandemic has changed the landscape that businesses operate in. What is, in your opinion, will be the biggest shift that businesses will have to deal with in the near term or medium term? Juan.
Well, to say one, it's quite a difficult thing, but in my view, the pandemic is very relevant, one in the middle of it, and we are worried about it. But it will pass. And the important thing will not be the pandemic, but what the pandemic has accelerated. And I think that the most relevant element that the pandemic would have accelerated will be the digital transformation. It already existed. It was somehow accelerated by the 2008-2012 crisis, but now it is clearly huge, massive, very rapid, transformational, and creating concentration of power. So these are different elements of the same process, but the process is the digital transformation accelerated to the utmost of it.
Absolutely. Any other questions from the audience, please? So what is the impact of ESG? This is a question. What is the impact of ESG on the future of capital markets and finance? And how does the GRC and ESG worlds intersect? Juan, so how do you see ESG kind of affect the capital markets and finance as you look ahead, firstly? Like you think it's shifting?
The most direct effect of it is that it is already happening and will increase in the future, that a very relevant part of the capital markets is going to exclude activities and companies that not fulfill ESG standards, and that's very clear in the environmental aspect. And even the central banks and supervisors are asking for environmental objectives to themselves. You are beginning to have the regulations or the standards and guides about how to fulfill environmental information within the accounts of the companies. So here and there, the capital markets and the financial system is being affected by that. And at the moment in time, we'll have an accelerated effect that is some companies and some sectors will not have anymore the possibility of get finance because nobody will want to finance them. And that will accelerate the process. Having said that, we all have to be careful because there are places where such type of activities are essential for the social well-being of people. And either we give them the possibility of change to the new world in a no excessively disruptive way, or we will have the destructions and the conflicts that I mentioned before. So this is, in my view, the main effect in the capital markets and the financial landscape.
No, and thank you so much, Juan, for that perspective. And we are now at the top of the hour. I'm going to just say, as we conclude our session today, that, the world right now is in an interesting phase in the post-pandemic era. We are getting digitization at an amazing pace. We touched upon the topics of ESG and how that's kind of shaping financial and capital markets, the geopolitical risks that are in front of us, and how we have to imagine and reimagine the GRC cloud of the future. And I like the concept of GRC by design. And that's something that, Juan touched upon. GRC by design brings GRC to the core, makes it an essential. And with that theme, I will say, let's go through our next day tomorrow when we open up. I think today we are the last session of the day. We've had amazing conversations throughout the day, and I'm enthused and excited for your participation. And hopefully we'll continue this conversation into tomorrow and the next day after. So thank you all for being here and amazing conversations today, and have a good day. Thank you all. And thank you, Juan.
Bye.
For your...
Thank you. Bye.